Hey guys, today we're going to go over Gong Fu brewing, and I'm going to walk you guys through a step-by-step Gong Fu brewing session. So Gong Fu tea brewing is a traditional way to make tea, and this method can be used to make oolong tea, green oolong, roasted oolong. It can also be used to make black tea as well as pu'er. It's also a preferred method for aged tea, white teas, and you can even use it for green tea. What's the difference between Gong Fu brewing and a traditional Western approach to brewing tea? Well, firstly, it's the teaware. So with Gong Fu tea, we use the small clay teapots, or we can use the lidded cup, the gaiwan. These small clay teapots are referred to as the Yixing clay, Yixing teapot. They come from the Yixing area of, that's where the clay was mined. And a lot of people have seen the popular videos of the masters making these handcrafted Yixing teapots. They're very fun to use. So I really love this method of brewing tea because it really deepens your connection with the tea by scaling everything down to such a small teapot. We have a tighter control over the variables, which is your tea to water ratio, like how much tea leaf you're using versus how much water, your brew time, and your temperature. So with a small teapot like this, when we're pouring out the tea, since there's such a small amount of water in there, the pour time is very short. So say we were brewing for like 30 seconds or what, then as soon as you start pouring, and then it's empty much quicker than if you're brewing in say like a English style teapot. The other thing is with temperature, because this clay has a high iron content, well, it's a lot like using a cast iron skillet, and it retains the heat much better than, say, a porcelain does. So this not only is super fun to use, but it also is one of the best ways to get the most out of your tea and to help the tea express the flavors the best, the most intense expression of the tea's flavor without over steeping. All right. So initially, one of the biggest differences between Gong Fu tea brewing and the Western style tea brewing is the tea to water ratio. In these small pots, we use about a fourth. Say if I'm using a tightly rolled oolong like this, I'm going to use about a fourth to a third of the way full of dry leaf. And then when that unfurls and expands, it's going to take up most of the volume of the teapot itself. So that tea to water ratio is one of the biggest differences. Then the steep times are much shorter, under a minute, typically anywhere from 10 seconds to 60 seconds. And then we'll get many infusions, and we'll be able to see how the tea expresses itself as it unfolds, and as it basically each infusion is going to have a slightly different flavor and a slightly different depth. All right, let's get started. So to begin with, I recommend using a 120 milliliter or 100 milliliter, basically about 100 to 180 milliliter teapot. That way you're not going to be using an excessive amount of tea to start, and you'll be able to get a hang of it, and you won't have to use so much tea. So the first step here is we're going to make sure we've got our water up to the boil. And the first step, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to heat the teapot. So I'll do that just by pouring water into the teapot, letting it sit for a second or two, and then decanting that into our pitcher here. And then I'm going to use that water to rinse and warm the teaware. Now the reason I tap the teapot on this towel here is so that the water from the bottom of the pot, it gets dried on the towel and it doesn't run then down the spout and into the pot itself, into the decanter here or the sharing pitcher. This is called the Gong Dao Bei, or the sharing pitcher. And I can use this water to heat my teacups here. All right, the first step is complete. All right, so second, we're gonna add the tea leaves. Now this is a tightly rolled oolong, so it will unfurl and expand to about 4 times the size after it's done, after about the 3rd or 4th infusion. So I'm just gonna add about enough leaf to fill about 1/4 of the teapot. And as you practice with this, and the more you do it, the more you'll get a good sense of how much tea to use. But basically, we're just gonna use the Goldilocks principle. The Goldilocks principle being not too much and not too little, right? All right, so now that we have added the tea leaf, what we're gonna do here is our quick infusion. This is the first initial infusion, and that is designed to, sometimes it's referred to as a rinse, but generally I like to think of it more as the way I was taught in Taiwan, is that it's called warming and preparing infusion. And this gets the leaves settled into the pot, nice and starting to open, so that it's ready for the subsequent infusions. And as well, it does give the, sometimes I was at a conference and they asked these tea masters, do you drink the first infusion? And half of them said no, and half of them said yes, and they each had very well thought out answers as to why they drink the first infusion or they don't drink the first infusion. So that is one of those things where we can research that in a later video. So I barely let the tea steep at all, and then I'm pouring it right away. So again, do we want to drink the first infusion? Well, I'm of the mind that if you know where your tea comes from and you have a sense that it is a good source, then it's fine to drink. And a lot of times I like to drink the first infusion to cleanse my palate and get it ready, because a lot of times we have, some sort of residue or kind of whatever is left from what we've been eating, or just a kind of feeling in the mouth. So this will get it ready. And it's really delicious. Even that first infusion that didn't steep very long, it's light, but it's really tasty, and it just kind of primes the mind and the body and the taste for what's to come. Nice and nutty, really good roast. This tea I'm brewing, actually, I forgot to mention, this is called the Charcoal Golden Lily. It's a charcoal roasted golden lily cultivar from Taiwan. A lot of times in between steeps, I'll make sure that my water's at the highest temperature possible here, especially with a roasted oolong like this. Now I'm gonna go for the first steeping infusion. Good. And so one of the things I like to do, or that I used to do all the time when I first started brewing tea in this style, is while the tea was steeping, I would just kind of count in my mind. And in that first infusion, I counted to 20. Now, this isn't how I do it now, and it's maybe not, I just recommend that as kind of a tool to get a sense of the time. Another thing I learned over the years was that to get the last bit of tea out of your pot here, instead of going like this, like doot, 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 the preferred method is to just tilt and retilt. And then when no tea comes out, then you know, okay, I've gotten all the water out. And the reason for that is if I'm doing this dropping method like so, it's kind of a risk, because if you're not careful, you could end up breaking the spout of the teapot on your sharing vessel here. Now, another thing I'm going to point out here is that in between infusions, now this is a really important pro tip here, highly recommend this for oolong tea specifically, is that in between infusions, you want to make sure and remove your teapot lid until you're ready to steep again. And the reason for that is because if you keep that lid on there, it will continue, the leaf will continue to cook. There's steam and all that heat, it kind of releases once you remove the lid, and that way you're going to get the most out of your tea, and you're going to have a beautiful flavor, aroma, mouthfeel, and that will be the best way to get the most out of your tea. Otherwise, it runs the risk of over steeping just by keeping the lid on in between infusions. Now, another thing I really love about this method of brewing tea is just that it's such a great way to share tea with friends, family, or whoever you want to enjoy tea with. And by doing so with the small cups, you have a small amount of expertly, super carefully, super intentionally prepared tea, and now you can share it, and it's just such a connecting experience, as well as a connoisseur kind of exquisite experience of delving into this amazing category of tea, which is Taiwanese oolong. Oh, it's so good. It's so delicious. It's kind of hearty and also soft and forgiving at the same time. It's smooth. It's almost buttery, but it's nutty. You know, there's so much going on with every sip of a tea prepared like this. And you'll notice that, especially when you're using really good tea and you're preparing it this way, the flavor, the notes, what comes to you, it's like, it changes. Like there's a real rose or dried rose kind of flavor, but it's subtle. And then it's that sweet, almost like a sweet dried rose kind of aroma flavor. And that's what I'm getting a strong hit of off that first infusion. And now we can just keep steeping the leaf over and over. Sometimes I'll reheat the water in between infusions, sometimes I won't. Again, this is just a sort of outline guide, and the main practice is for you to try this and experiment, see what works for you, see what doesn't, and enjoy the process, right? It's just so much fun to brew tea this way. You know, a lot of times you'll see a demonstration of this type of brew style, and it's kind of off-putting for me, because if it's coming out of that more like the mainland China style, where they have the young women dressed in the pretty clothes and they're doing all kinds of very like sophisticated movements with their hands, that's not necessary. And the Taiwan style is a bit more minimalist, and they focus on brewing good tea. You don't need to move your hand in a fancy way. And the reason why I find that other style with the extra movements a bit off-putting is because it distances people from this style of brewing tea. It makes people think, oh, I could never brew tea like that. Well, it's very easy to brew tea like this, you know? So the main thing is try, play, experiment. There's a lot of online material, you know, check out our blog. Just see what you can learn from doing it as well. But this guide here, step by step, is sort of meant to give you guys the key foundation of brewing tea in this style. And how many infusions can you get? Well, you can just keep steeping the tea over and over until you don't like it anymore. Typically, a tea like this, I'll get anywhere from 6 to 10 infusions, and you can get more, you can get less. Some people only want 5. It really depends on another set of ideas or how you're thinking about tea, you know? The tea is going to taste good continually, but it's like a little bit weaker as it goes on. So it tends to peak at around the 3rd or 4th infusion, just depending on how you're brewing it, how long your infusions are. And other than that, you know, yeah, it's just going to be a series of your experience with the tea. And so one of the things you can, you know, after you've brewed it a few times, or like say after your third or fourth infusion here, you can check out like how much leaf is in the pot. And, you know, is it fluffy? Is it densely packed? You can kind of check it out, see how much leaf is in there. And that will give you some information about how much to use next time, or if you've used the right amount, if you've used too much, if you could use more. That's one of the things you're going to pay attention to, the leaf after it's expanded. Then I talked about water temperature, but generally with the tightly rolled oolongs, we're going to use water right off the boil, as close to boiling as possible. Lid removal between infusions. This I cannot emphasize enough. It's going to dramatically improve the quality of your tea for the subsequent infusions. Especially, pour with a cooked pour, you can get away with leaving the lid on and but generally I would say with the oolongs, yeah, definitely. And most teas, I would just get into that habit of removing the lid between infusions. Steep time, 30 to 60 seconds, you know, give or take, and you can experiment with that. And lastly, the multiple infusions. You can either combine infusions or you can savor them one infusion after the other to observe the flavor as it changes. Okay guys, I really appreciate you watching, and be sure to comment below if you have any questions. You know, just enjoy the experience and have fun sharing tea with your friends. It's a very fun way to make tea. Thanks for watching.